Do you remember a time when leaving the house meant disappearing? No GPS dot on a map, no text me when you get there pings, just a quiet trust that you would return before the streetlights came on. If you were born between the late 70s and mid 80s, you grew up in a world that no longer exists, a world where the boundary between presence and absence was absolute. You aren't quite Gen X, shaped entirely in analog independence, but you aren't truly a millennial either. Raised inside the architecture of the internet, you are a Xennial. You live in the seam, the tectonic rift between two civilizations. And living in a seam has a psychological cost. Identity usually forms from belonging to a place or a generation, but for you, that recognition is always slightly out of sync. You were too young for the hardened cynicism of Gen X, yet too analog for the native digital fluency of millennials. You learned something subtle and deep, how to adapt without fully identifying, and how to move between worlds without ever claiming either one as home. Back to a time before algorithms learned your preferences. Boredom was a daily landscape you had to cross on your own. There were long, empty afternoons, with nothing scheduled, nothing streaming, and nothing glowing in your hand. In modern psychology, this is known as the default mode network, a neural circuit that fires only when attention turns inward, when the mind is free to wander and recombine ideas. For a child of that era, boredom wasn't a failure of entertainment. It was the default state of being. From that emptiness, you learn to generate, experience from pure imagination. You turn sticks into swords, sidewalks into racetracks, and empty rooms into entire universes. You built worlds. You also learned the art of waiting. Waiting for photos to be developed, waiting for a favorite song to come on the radio, or waiting for a friend to show up at a physical meeting spot at exactly 4 p.m. Because once you left the house, you were unreachable. Waiting wasn't frustrating. It was normal. And in that waiting, a vital psychological muscle was formed. Delayed gratification, a quiet tolerance for uncertainty. Your social world was physical, immediate, and unscripted. Conflict happened face to face, skin to skin, real presence. Tone, posture, and silence carried weights that modern text has stripped away. You learned how to read a room before a thread. You learned how to repair friction instead of escaping discomfort. And then there was solitude, not loneliness, but a simple condition of being alone with your thoughts. No notifications punctured the quiet. No infinite scroll replaced reflection. Your mind had space to echo. Your mind had space to echo. That childhood, now nearly extinct, left you with something rare, the capacity to tolerate stillness without panic, the ability to imagine without input, and to exist briefly unentertained and unobserved. You are among the last adults, whose inner life formed in that analog silence, before attention became a commodity and before boredom was engineered away. Then, just as you were becoming yourself, the world changed. It changed right in the middle of your adolescence, that fragile window when identity is still soft, still asking, who am I becoming? 1 year, connection meant a phone on a wall. A few years later, it was a glowing portal humming in the corner of your room, with a shrill song of a 56K modem. You were old enough to remember the before, yet young enough to master the after. This created a technological bilingualism. You learn the language of analog presence, eye contact, pauses, physical spaces, and then the language of digital mediation. Usernames, type tones, curated selves, and connection without proximity. For you, the internet was never the air you breathed. It was a place you went. You logged on, and just as importantly, you logged off. There was a clear boundary, almost architectural, between your physical life and your digital one. You remember building your first online identity, not as an extension of yourself, but as a version assembled, edited, and tried on. The early internet was less a mirror than a laboratory. But here is the quiet psychological shift. As your adulthood unfolded, that boundary dissolved. The place you visited became your environment. Work moved online, friendship moved online, memory moved online, and somewhere along the way, the log-off door disappeared. Even now, you carry the memory of when it existed, a time when connection had edges, when presence and absence were distinct. Growing up during the internet shift didn't just teach you new tools, it rewired your sense of where life happens. It left you with the strange awareness that reality itself once had an exit button. Identity usually grows from belonging to a generation or a shared story. But if you are a Xennial, that recognition often arrives slightly out of focus. You were told you were Gen X, yet you didn't quite share their detachment. Later, you were folded into Millennials, yet you never felt like a native inhabitant of the digital world. So, you learned to translate rather than inhabit. Psychologically, this creates a subtle but persistent state, the in-between identity. You are not fragmented, you are a hybrid. You understand the pre-internet skepticism of older cohorts, but you also understand the fluid, networked self of younger ones. But recognition is not the same as belonging. Over time, this produces a quiet self-perception. I adapt everywhere, but I originate nowhere. It is why generational debates often feel strangely external to you. You watch boomer versus millennial wars from the sidelines. There is a psychological strength in this position, cognitive flexibility, empathy across difference, comfort with transition. But there is a cost, a softer anchor of identity, fewer cultural mirrors, and less reinforcement that your unique experience forms a coherent whole. Then came the timing of the world. Your childhood unfolded in the long, bright afterglow of the 1990s, a decade impossibly stable. The cultural story was simple: study hard, go to college, and step into a future wider and safer than the past. You believed it because children are supposed to believe the world they inherit will hold. But at the threshold, the trajectory broke. The dot-com bubble burst as you were entering the workforce. Stability became provisional. Then came 9/11, striking at your launch. The psychological message was immediate. The world can change overnight, and safety is not guaranteed by progress. A collapse of paths, followed by the 2008 financial crisis, landing precisely when you were trying to buy homes or start families, stacked disruptions. These imprinted a distinctive worldview, cynical optimism. You hold the hope you were raised with, but now systems break. As adulthood solidified, a total shift occurred. Email followed you out of the office, laptops followed you onto your couch. Eventually, the smartphone dissolved the last remaining boundary between presence and demand. For you, this was never normal. It was an intrusion that arrived after your identity had already been formed. You remember when being unreachable was expected. If someone needed you, they waited. If you were gone, you were simply gone. No status light glowing in the network. Now, your life lives inside an always-on field. The day has no clean perimeter. This is where the friction lies. You adapted to constant connectivity, but you never internalized it as natural. Part of your nervous system still expects intervals. The offline stretch, where attention can rest without vigilance. You carry a low-grade cognitive tension, the memory of boundaries. The offline stretch, where attention can rest without vigilance. You carry a low-grade cognitive tension of the memory of boundaries. When you look at your children, you're looking at a childhood structurally different from your own. You remember bikes without tracking apps, afternoons without supervision, friendships negotiated face-to-face. But the children you are raising live inside the network from the start. Their friendships extend through devices. Their risks travel faster. Their mistakes can persist. Childhood is now partially public, archived, and mediated. This creates a quiet parental dissonance. Part of your measures, real childhood by analog standards, outdoor autonomy, private experimentation. You want to give them the freedom you had, the boredom that shaped you, the offline space where identity could unfold slowly, without an audience. Yet you know the environment has changed. To remove them entirely is isolation. To immerse them fully is exposure. So you parent across worlds. You translate dangers. Your parents never had to explain algorithms, permanence, strangers without faces. You try to preserve experiences they may never encounter. Unplugged play, waiting, being unreachable. You are raising natives. With analog memory, holding the responsibility of remembering what childhood felt like before it was connected. At work, generational lines run quietly. On one side, colleagues are shaped by hierarchy and clear boundaries. On the other, those fluent in rapid change and fluid identity. You stand between. You understand the analog logic of structure and loyalty. You also understand the digital logic of speed and flexibility. So you translate. You explain to older leaders why attention cannot be commanded indefinitely in an always-on culture, why late-night emails ripple through teams, and you explain to younger co-workers why some systems still move slowly, why trust occurs over time, why presence matters beyond output. This isn't just skill, it is cognitive positioning. Your mind was formed across two operational models of society, industrial and digital, and learned to navigate both without discarding either. You become the mediator, the interpreter, the connective tissue that lets them function together. By midlife, responsibilities accumulate, but for Xennials, they often converge. Above you, parents are aging, needing more coordination, more presence, health systems to navigate, finances to monitor, roles slowly reversing. Below you, children are still forming in a world more complex, more exposed, more demanding than the one you knew. Their needs extend into digital safety and emotional literacy. Future uncertainty looms. Between these two gravitational pulls, you hold your own life in suspension. Career stability arrived later than expected due to disruptions. So adulthood has often felt compressed, responsibilities intensifying just as footing finally solidified. Psychologists describe this as role strain. The structural middle absorbs pressure from both directions. You keep schedules aligned, you bridge expectations, you carry memory and anticipation at once. And slowly, a specific exhaustion takes shape, not collapse, but continuous load. The weight of holding two generations while still becoming yourself. There is something you carry that is becoming rare, lived memory of a human pace before constant connection, days without interruption, friendships that deepened without documentation, thoughts that formed slowly, unshared and unobserved. You remember what it felt like to be unreachable. As the world moves further into presence, your memories are cultural evidence, evidence that attention once had margins and identity had privacy. You're the last adults whose inner life began in that analog quiet. Your experience matters because the future needs a pause. If you recognize yourself here, in this bridge between eras, you are not invisible. You are continuity. You are what a transition looks like when it becomes human. If this resonated, stay with us. Let's map the last unconnected childhood together. Thank you for reading.